The studio lights gradually dim as Dr. Phil's theme music echoes through the room. The audience, consisting of about 200 people, remains silent, expectant. Cameras glide along invisible tracks, capturing strategic angles of the empty stage. The deep blue background with the show's stylized logo contrasts with the light gray armchairs arranged in a semicircle. The tension is palpable even before the stars enter. Before we delve into this shocking story, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. And please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what you thought of this case. Your opinion is crucial for us to continue bringing you heartwarming content. A murmur runs through the audience as Dr. Phil McGraw emerges from the side aisle. He walks with firm, measured steps, wearing an impeccably tailored navy blue suit. His face displays the serious and determined expression that has become his trademark over decades on American television. The host's attentive eyes scan the room as he takes his position center stage, discreetly adjusting his lapel microphone. For a moment, Dr. Phil silently observes the three still empty seats in front of him. The audience holds its breath, anticipating the drama about to unfold. Then, with an almost imperceptible gesture of his hand, he signals to the producers. The side doors open again, revealing three figures who hesitantly advance towards the spotlight. Leading the way is Martha Wilson, a 78-year-old woman whose silver hair forms an austere bun. Her gait is slow, aided by a handcrafted dark wooden cane. Her wrinkled hands, marked by age spots, grip a vintage brown leather bag tightly, as if guarding a priceless treasure. Her blue eyes, though clouded by incipient cataracts, carry the weight of ancient secrets. She wears a formal ensemble of a petrol blue skirt and blazer, clothing from another era, preserved with meticulous care. Right behind her, Rebecca Wilson, 60, Martha's daughter, walks with the rigid posture of someone preparing for battle. Her shoulder-length brown hair frames an angular, tense face. She wears black dress pants and a white button-down blouse, deliberately neutral in professional attire. Her fingers drum nervously against the side of her leg as she moves forward, deliberately avoiding the camera's gaze. Finally, Jason Wilson, 45, the grandson, appears with an expression torn between curiosity and apprehension. Tall and broad-shouldered, he seems diminished by the circumstances. His stubble and red eyes suggest sleepless nights. He wears dark jeans and a blue shirt under a casual gray blazer. His hands are in his pockets, and his gaze alternates between his mother, his grandmother, and Dr. Phil, as if trying to decipher a puzzle that is too complex. The three take their places in the arranged chairs, forming an image of collective discomfort. Martha carefully positions her bag on her lap, her hands never leaving the object. Rebecca crosses her legs and straightens her posture, like a student before a crucial exam. Jason leans forward, elbows resting on his knees, in a posture of someone ready to stand up at any moment. Phil stands tall, dominating the space with his presence. Today, he begins, his deep voice reverberating through the silent studio. We're dealing with a family secret that has remained buried for almost half a century. He pauses deliberately, his eyes capturing every reaction from his guests. A secret that has shaped 3 generations of the Wilson family, in ways none of them could have imagined. The camera focuses on Jason, who shifts in his seat. His hands are now clasped together, the knuckles white from the pressure. A carefully edited montage appears on the studio screens, sepia photographs of a family. From the 1970s, a stern-looking man, a younger Martha, and a girl who is certainly Rebecca as a child. The images transition to a 2-story colonial-style house, and finally to the same charred structure, still smoldering, with fire trucks and ambulances surrounding it. The audience reacts with audible gasps. Jason, Dr. Phil says, turning to the tense man before him, "You contacted our program because you feel your family is being torn apart by a past that no one discusses. That's not a question, but a statement based on weeks of preliminary research by the production team. Can you tell us more about it?" Jason takes a deep breath, the sound picked up by the sensitive microphones. He runs a hand through his short, dark brown hair, a nervous gesture he will repeat several times during the recording. Phil, I grew up hearing stories about my grandfather Richard, who died before I was born. His voice is deeper than you would expect, almost hoarse. The family hero, the man who built everything from nothing, who gave my grandmother and mother a comfortable life after they came from humble beginnings. He pauses, swallowing hard. The camera captures a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. Every anniversary of his death, we placed flowers on his grave. We kept his photos in prominent places in our homes. He was almost a mythical figure to me. Jason glances briefly at his grandmother, whose expression remains impassive. But in recent years, I've started noticing strange behavior. My grandmother Martha has frequent nightmares where she screams his name, not in a tone of sadness, but of terror. Martha shifts uncomfortably in her chair, her fingers tightening even more on her bag. My mother gets visibly upset when I mention the fire. Jason continues. She changes the subject, makes excuses to leave the room. Once, when I insisted, she broke a glass she was holding, cutting her own hand. He looks up at Dr. Phil. There's something wrong with this story. Something that's been denied to me my whole life. And what exactly did you discover that led you to seek us out now? Dr. Phil asks, leaning forward, his eyes never leaving Jason's face. Nothing concrete, just fragments. Jason sighs, his frustration evident. Whispered comments that cease when I enter the room. Old documents that mysteriously disappear when I ask about them. A box in Grandma's attic that's always locked and whose key no one admits to having. He looks directly at Martha and Rebecca. I tried everything to get answers. I contacted former neighbors. I searched newspaper archives about the fire. I even hired a private investigator who mysteriously dropped the case after talking to my mother. The camera captures Rebecca's face, which visibly pales at this revelation. I feel like I'm living a lie. Jason's voice falters slightly, revealing the emotional impact of the moment. Like my entire family identity is built on something false. I'm here because I need the truth. I can't live like this anymore. Rebecca, visibly uncomfortable, crosses her arms defensively. Her eyes avoid both Jason and the cameras. Jason is exaggerating, she says, her voice controlled, but with a slight tremor at the edges. Everyone has family secrets. Some things are better left in the past. Stirring up old scars only causes more pain. Dr. Phil raises an eyebrow, his face conveying skepticism. So you admit there's a secret? Something you're deliberately hiding from Jason? That's not what I said. Rebecca replies quickly, a blush rising up her neck. I just think Jason is turning coincidences and impressions into some kind of elaborate conspiracy. She glances briefly at her mother, as if seeking support. Mom is old. She has episodes of confusion. Nightmares are normal at her age. Martha, the grandmother, remains silent throughout this exchange. Her gnarled fingers grip the bag in her lap as if it contained the last available oxygen in a catastrophe. Her eyes, however, show no confusion whatsoever. On the contrary, they reflect a painful lucidity. Phil observes the family dynamic for a few moments, allowing the silence to amplify the tension. The audience is completely absorbed, leaning forward in their seats. Martha, Dr. Phil finally says, turning his full attention to the elderly woman. You haven't said a word since you walked into the studio. What do you think of all this? Martha finally looks up, meeting Dr. Phil's eyes. Her voice, when she finally speaks, is surprisingly firm. Some secrets protect, others destroy. The hard part is knowing the difference before it's too late. The tension is palpable as Dr. Phil approaches Martha, who seems to have shrunk back in her chair. Subtle suspenseful music plays in the background, almost imperceptible, but effective in intensifying the atmosphere. The cameras move in a slow, circular motion, creating the sensation that space is closing in on the protagonists. Martha, Dr. Phil begins, his tone now softer, but no less persistent. He positions himself strategically between Martha and Rebecca, temporarily blocking eye contact between mother and daughter. I'm noticing you've been carrying something very heavy for a long time. He pauses, studying the micro-expressions on the woman's wrinkled face. Something about what happened to your husband that night in March 1980. The specific mention of the date causes Martha to look up, revealing a deep sadness mixed with something akin to resignation. The camera perfectly captures this moment, while the audience collectively holds their breath. Richard was a good man in many ways, she begins, her voice initially almost a whisper, forcing everyone to concentrate intensely on her words. A provider, we never lacked anything material in our home. A father who was present on public occasions, school parties, presentations, community events. Martha pauses, her fingers now unconsciously caressing the gold clasp of the bag in her lap. The camera focuses on this repetitive, almost hypnotic movement. But there was another side to him, she continues, her voice gradually gaining strength. A side the public didn't know. A side that only the walls of our house witnessed. Doctor. Phil nods, encouraging her to continue. The audience is completely silent, many spectators leaning forward, absorbing every word. He had a terrible temper. Any little frustration, a meal now served exactly on time, an unexpected bill, a toy left in the hallway could trigger his rage. Martha glances briefly at Rebecca, whose expression is now one of visible alarm. And when he drank, he drank almost every night. There were consequences. Martha takes a deep breath, her hands now trembling slightly, especially for Rebecca, who was just a child at the time. 15 years old, a sensitive, artistic girl, so different from what Richard expected of a daughter. Rebecca shifts uncomfortably in her chair, her body language completely closed off now, arms crossed tightly over her chest, legs crossed, body turned slightly away from the cameras. Mom, she interrupts, her voice tense. We don't need to talk about that right now. It's not relevant to what Jason wants to know. I disagree, interjects Dr. Phil, keeping his eyes fixed on Martha. I think it's extremely relevant. He repositions himself, now closer to Martha, creating a seemingly more intimate space despite the cameras and the audience. The fire, he insists. What really happened that night? Martha, the elderly woman, sighs deeply, the sound captured perfectly by the microphones. The studio is so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The official version, the one we told the police, the neighbors, the insurance company, is that it was an accident. Martha speaks now with surprising clarity, as if reciting a story rehearsed countless times. A short circuit in the basement where Richard kept his carpentry workshop. He was trapped down there, perhaps unconscious from the smoke even before the fire had fully spread. He couldn't escape. She pauses painfully, her eyes lost in distant memories. But that's not the whole truth. Jason leans forward, so tense he looked like a violin string about to snap. What are you saying, Grandma? I'm telling you it wasn't an accident. Martha confesses, her voice now firmer, almost defiant. Someone in our family knew Richard was in the basement that night, knew he was drunk, probably passed out in his old chair after drinking almost a whole bottle of whiskey. Martha looks directly at Dr. Phil now, ignoring the audible gasps from the audience. Someone who was tired of the abuse, the threats, the constant fear we live with. Her eyes fill with tears, but she doesn't let them fall. This person sabotaged the electrical wiring, deliberately caused a short circuit when they were sure Richard wouldn't be able to escape. A murmur runs through the studio. Dr. Phil remains impassive, but his eyes reveal that he is calculating every word, every implication. And who was this person, Martha? He asks, his calm voice contrasting with the gravity of the question. Martha looks directly at him, then briefly at the cameras, as if speaking not only to those present, but to some invisible tribunal of posterity. It was me, Phil. I killed my husband. The statement hangs in the air like a toxic cloud. Rebecca gasps, putting her hand to her mouth. Jason turns visibly pale, leaning back in his chair as if he'd been physically struck. The audience reacts with muffled exclamations of shock. I waited until he was completely drunk, Martha continues, her voice now strangely distant, as if narrating someone else's story. That night, he had been particularly cruel. He broke Rebecca's arm because she was 15 minutes late for a school rehearsal. 15 minutes. She shakes her head slowly. I took her to the hospital. We made up a story about a fall down the stairs. When we got back, he was already in the basement, unconscious. I went down there, messed with the electrical wiring near the cans of solvent he kept for his woodworking projects. I knew it would cause a fire. Dr. Phil narrows his eyes, observing not only Martha, but also Rebecca, whose reaction seems almost rehearsed. Too much shock, too much surprise. But there's more to this story, isn't there, Martha? Because you're not telling us everything yet. Martha looks away for the first time. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you know, Doctor. Phil insists, his voice now more incisive. And I think Rebecca knows too. Jason came to us because he feels there's a secret corroding his family from within. You just confessed to murder, something that can have legal consequences even after so many years. But my instinct, based on decades dealing with family secrets, tells me we haven't gotten to the heart of the matter yet. He leans closer, his voice lowering to an almost conspiratorial tone. It's time for the whole truth to come out, Martha, for everyone's sake. The studio is completely still, everyone present holding their breath, as Martha faces Dr. Phil's penetrating gaze. The tension is almost palpable as everyone waits for her answer. The atmosphere in the studio noticeably changes, the lights seem to intensify, casting sharper shadows under the eyes of all the participants. Beads of sweat are visible on Rebecca's forehead, while the trembling in Martha's hands has become more pronounced. Jason sits on the edge of his chair, as if ready to flee at any moment. Members of the technical crew exchange meaningful glances backstage, realizing they are witnessing one of those rare, genuinely unpredictable moments in television. A cameraman silently approaches to capture close-ups of the protagonist's expressions. "Martha, Dr. Phil says," his voice calm but insistent, creating a dramatic contrast with the tension of the room. "When our team conducted the preliminary interview with you at your home last week, they noticed how you were never separated from that bag." He points to the object Martha holds with such determination. "Even to go to the bathroom, you took it with you." Martha looks at her bag, her fingers gripping the worn leather, the bluish veins of her old hands standing out beneath the translucent skin. "You brought something today, didn't you? Something you've been hiding for almost 5 decades. The silence that follows is deafening. Martha seems to be waging an internal battle, her eyes darting rapidly between Dr. Phil, Rebecca, and Jason. The camera perfectly captures this moment of indecision, while the background music increases almost imperceptibly in intensity. Finally, with a sigh that seems to carry the weight of half a century, Martha slowly opens the golden clasp of the bag. The metallic sound echoes through the silent studio. With trembling hands, she pulls out a small notebook with a dark brown leather cover, visibly worn by time. The yellowed and wavy pages project a smell of mildew and ancient secrets that almost seems to reach the nostrils of the viewers. "My diary," she says simply, her voice now surprisingly firm. "I started writing it a week before the fire, when I realized something terrible was about to happen in our house. I continued for years afterward, documenting everything: the investigations, the lies, the aftermath." Phil extends his hand, his eyes never leaving Martha's. "May I?" Martha hesitates, holding the diary against her chest for a moment. Her eyes briefly turn to Rebecca, who is now completely rigid, her face a barely disguised mask of terror. After a few seconds that seem like an eternity, Martha hands over the diary. The camera focuses on Dr. Phil's hands as he receives the object with the respect due to a historical relic. He opens it carefully, the antique binding crackling in protest. The pages are filled with elegant, though sometimes shaky, handwriting in faded bluey. Dr. Phil begins to leaf through it slowly, his eyes quickly scanning the contents. "Martha, this is..." He hesitates, clearly impacted by what he's reading. There are entries here detailing years of abuse, fractures, burns, humiliations. He looks at Rebecca, whose face is now completely drained of color. "What your husband did to you both was..." "That's not relevant now," Martha interrupts firmly. "Go to the entries from March 1980, a week before the fire." Dr. Phil obeys, flipping through the pages until he finds the indicated date. His eyes widen slightly as he reads some of the entries. March 15, 1980. "Rebecca picked up the basement key today. I don't know what she's planning, but her look startled me. There's something different about her since yesterday, a determination I've never seen before." He glances at Martha and then at Rebecca. March 16th. "Rebecca asked me to take Richard to the bar and make sure he drank a lot. She said it would be the last time we'd have to put up with his temper. I didn't ask what she meant. I think, deep down, I knew." Rebecca is visibly shaken now. "That's not true. She's making it up. She must have written that diary recently to incriminate me." The ink and paper analysis that our team discreetly conducted shows that the diary is authentic. From the indicated period, Dr. Phil replies calmly, before turning his attention to Martha. "Are you saying it was Rebecca, not you, who sabotaged the electrical wiring?" Martha shakes her head slowly. "I'm saying I took the blame all these years to protect her. She was just a teenager, Phil, a girl who suffered horrors at the hands of her own father." Jason watches this exchange with an expression of growing horror. "Wait, are you saying that my mother killed my grandfather, Dr. Phil continues flipping through the diary, arriving at a specific page marked with a faded red ribbon. His eyes quickly scan the lines written in shaky handwriting, unlike previous entries, as if written in a moment of extreme emotional turmoil. Suddenly, his expression changes. The professional mask of a controlled therapist gives way to an expression of genuine shock. He looks at Martha, then at Rebecca, then at the producers off stage. One of the executive producers, realizing the situation, steps forward, uncertain. This changes everything, murmurs Dr. Phil, almost to himself, closing the diary. Then, in a louder, more decisive tone, he addresses the team. Stop recording, now. The studio falls into absolute silence. The cameras continue rolling, but all the technicians and producers are motionless, stunned by the sudden command. The audience exchanges confused glances, uncertain whether this interruption is part of the program or if they are witnessing something truly unprecedented. I told you to stop recording, Dr. Phil repeats, more emphatically this time, slamming the diary shut. We need a break. We need to consult our legal team. This is too serious to be handled unprepared. The executive producer finally reacts, making a cut signal to the cameras. Okay, everyone, let's take a break. Please remain calm and stay in your seats. The audience begins to murmur, the volume growing rapidly as speculations take shape. Jason is standing now, exalted gestures directed at both his mother and his grandmother. Rebecca remains seated, her face hidden in her hands. Martha simply observes the scene, the diary now back in her wrinkled hands, an expression of resignation on her face. The studio lights shift to a different scheme, signaling a break in filming, while members of the show's legal team quickly converge on the stage. Controlled chaos ensues as everyone tries to process what has just happened and what the contents of that little diary could mean. 15 minutes turned into 45. The audience was politely, but firmly, withdrawn from the studio, with promises of a return at a future date to complete the recording. The atmosphere, once vibrant and full of expectation, is now strangely empty, creating a peculiar acoustic that amplifies every breath and movement of the few who remain. Only Dr. Phil, the Wilsons, and a minimal production team are present. An executive producer, a legal consultant, a crisis psychologist, and two essential camera operators. The lights have been dimmed, creating a more intimate, almost confessional atmosphere. Boom microphones have been strategically positioned to capture every nuance of the voices. Jason, Martha, and Rebecca were momentarily separated for individual conversations with the legal team. Now reunited, they occupy the same seats as before, but the dynamic between them is noticeably altered. Rebecca appears to have cried during the break, her red and swollen eyes betraying her outward composure. Martha displays an almost supernatural serenity, as if a great weight has been lifted simply by the prospect of revelation. Jason is clearly shaken, his body language alternating between defensiveness and childlike helplessness. Dr. Phil now occupies a chair brought in to complete the circle with the Wilsons, symbolizing a shift in the tone of the conversation, no longer a host confronting guests, but a mediator between members of a fragmented family. He holds the diary open to a specific page, his expression grave. What I read here, he begins, his voice lower and devoid of its previous performative energy, goes beyond an unsolved crime or a belated confession. It's something that affects not only the past, but fundamentally the present of all of you. He turns to Jason, especially yours, Jason. Jason is visibly tense, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. What's going on? What did it say that was so shocking that you had to interrupt the entire program? Dr. Phil takes a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. The diary reveals that her grandmother, Martha, took the blame for a crime she didn't commit. She constructed an elaborate narrative over decades to protect her daughter. He glances briefly at Rebecca, whose audible breathing is the only indication of her inner turmoil. It was her mother, Rebecca, then only 15 years old, who sabotaged the basement's electrical wiring, knowing her father would be there that night, unconscious from drunkenness. Rebecca begins to cry silently, not denying the accusation this time. Her tears fall freely, staining her immaculate white blouse. But there's more, Dr. Phil continues, turning another page where an old black and white photograph is carefully pasted in. The photo shows a teenage Rebecca, visibly pregnant, her face marked by a dark bruise around her right eye. Martha writes here, in the entry for March 10th, Rebecca confessed to me today that she is 2 months pregnant. Richard found out yesterday when he found the test hidden in the bathroom. He beat her severely and threatened to force her to have an abortion. As soon as the bruise on her face faded enough not to raise suspicion at the hospital, That was the last straw. My daughter wasn't just acting out of revenge for years of abuse. She was protecting her unborn baby, my grandchild. Jason stands completely still, as if every muscle in his body has simultaneously gone into shock. His face cycles through a series of emotions in rapid succession: confusion, horror, understanding, and finally, a kind of painful clarity. He's saying that. He stammers, unable to finish the sentence, his eyes fixed on the photograph of the pregnant teenager who is his mother. Yes, Drive.Phil confirms, looking directly at you. According to this journal, and confirmed by our legal consultant in a private conversation with your mother during the break, you were already on your way when all this happened. The fire occurred on March 17, 1980. You were born on September 20th of the same year. But I always believed, Jason stammers again, his voice almost inaudible, that you were born in 1982, 2 years later, from a relationship your mother had in college with an exchange student who returned to his country. Before knowing about the pregnancy, Dr. Phil adds for him, it was the story they invented to protect you both and avoid questions about the true paternity. A profound silence settles as Jason processes this revelation. The cameras capture every micro-expression on his face as he reconsiders his entire personal history. In this new light, Martha rises with difficulty, leaning on her cane, and approaches her grandson. Without saying a word, she extends her wrinkled hand and touches Jason's face in a gesture of primal tenderness. I was going to take this secret to the grave, Jason, Martha says, her voice choked with emotion. Every time you asked about your biological father, every time you expressed frustration that he never got in touch, I felt like a knife was twisting in my heart. She shakes her head slowly. But in recent years, with all these TV series about unsolved crimes, with DNA testing becoming so commonplace, with your growing obsession with researching your origins, I've been afraid that the truth will come out in another way, in a way that none of us could control. Rebecca finally finds her voice, lifting her gaze to meet her sons for the first time since the revelation. I was 15, Jason, your grandfather. She hesitates, swallowing hard. Richard abused me in ways I never managed to tell anyone, ways that go beyond the physical abuse documented in that diary. The implication hangs heavily in the air, needing no explicit explanation to be understood by all present. When he found out I was pregnant, the result of, she can't finish the sentence, the words refusing to form. He was furious. He said I'd ruined the family reputation, that I was a disgrace. He said he'd destroy us both, me and the baby, and that nobody would ever know. His hands trembled violently. I heard him planning everything on the phone with a doctor he knew, someone who performed illegal procedures in a clandestine clinic. The date was already set. He was going to take me there in 3 days. So you killed him, Jason concludes, his voice strangely calm. I saved us, Rebecca corrects, with surprising conviction through her tears. I saved both of us. I saved you, Jason. She reaches out to her son, without touching him, as if fearing rejection. And my mother saved me by taking the blame, in case anyone ever suspected it wasn't an accident. Dr. Phil observes the scene with a restrained expression, the experienced professional momentarily giving way to the human being impacted by the tragedy. Before him, I stopped recording because I immediately understood the gravity of what we're dealing with here. He explains, looking directly at the main camera, as if speaking not only to those present, but to a future audience. This isn't just a family secret, it's a confession to premeditated murder, albeit under exceptional circumstances. Even though it happened 45 years ago, even considering the mitigating circumstances of documented abuse and imminent threat, there are serious legal implications. Am I going to be arrested? Rebecca asks, suddenly alarmed, the reality of the potential consequences finally imposing itself over the emotional catharsis. I don't know, Doctor. Phil replies honestly. Consulting with criminal defense attorneys would be prudent. Statute of limitations may apply, and there are considerations of extended self-defense, especially considering your age at the time and the documented abuse. He looks at each of them. But I know the three of you need to decide how to proceed now that the truth is out, and I want to help you find the best possible path forward, whatever decision you make about making this story public or not. Jason, still processing the revelations, looks at his mother with new eyes, no longer just the overprotective maternal figure who irritated him with her secrets, but a desperate teenager who made an impossible decision to protect her unborn child. Everything you did. Was it because of me? Rebecca simply nods, unable to speak through her tears. 3 days later, the program begins again. The studio is full once more, the audience back in their seats, an atmosphere of renewed anticipation hanging in the air. The same chairs are arranged on the stage, the same carefully adjusted lighting, but something fundamental has changed. There is a new energy in the atmosphere, no longer of festering secrets, but of painful truths confronted. Martha, Rebecca, and Jason are seated side by side, their bodies slightly closer than before. Their body language is noticeably different. Where there was once tension and distrust, now there is a kind of shared understanding, still fragile, but undeniably present. Martha no longer clutches her bag desperately. The diary rests openly on a side table, its secret now exposed to the world. Rebecca maintains an upright posture, but her eyes no longer avoid the cameras. There is a calm dignity in her expression that was previously absent. Jason, perhaps the most transformed of the three, displays a complex expression that mixes grief over the loss of certain illusions with a new kind of determination. Dr. Phil stands, addressing both them and the newly readmitted audience, as well as the cameras that will broadcast this conclusion to millions of viewers. When we stopped recording 3 days ago, we were faced with revelations that transcended the usual scope of our program, explains Dr. Phil, his voice modulated to convey both authority and compassion. We were confronted not only with family secrets, but with complex legal and ethical issues that required careful consideration and professional advice. The camera slowly pans across the attentive audience before returning to the protagonists on stage. After intensive legal and psychological counseling over the past 3 days, the Wilson family has made some difficult decisions. Dr. Phil continues. Rebecca has decided to seek a criminal attorney and voluntarily present herself to the authorities, telling the whole truth about what happened that night in March 1980. The camera shows Rebecca, who appears surprisingly serene for someone who could face serious legal consequences. There's something in her posture that suggests liberation, as if the weight of decades of secrecy were more oppressive than the prospect of a possible criminal trial, given the extraordinary circumstances, her age at the time, the documented 15 years of physical and sexual abuse, and the fact that she was pregnant and directly threatened. Her lawyers believe there is a strong case for a compassionate resolution in this case. Dr. Phil continues. The statute of limitations for homicide varies between states, and there is precedent for considering extended self-defense in cases of chronic abuse. Regardless of the legal outcome, Rebecca is finally free from the burden of 45 years of secrecy. Jason reaches for his mother's hand and squeezes it tightly, a gesture of unconditional support that causes many in the audience to bring their hands to their eyes to wipe away discreet tears. I discovered that my personal story is different from everything I believed my whole life, says Jason, his voice choked but firm. I discovered that I am the product of a terrible event, of unthinkable violence. He pauses, searching for the right words. But I also discovered that I am the product of immense love and sacrifice. My mother, at 15, risked everything for me even before I was born. My grandmother carried a devastating secret for decades to protect us. Martha smiles sadly, the wrinkles on her face appearing simultaneously deeper and softer under the studio lighting. There's no manual for situations like this, she says, her voice frail but clear. We did the best we could with the emotional tools we had at the time. Maybe today, with more resources, with more awareness of domestic abuse, we would have found another way. But we can't rewrite the past. Dr. Phil nods in agreement before walking to the center of the stage, strategically positioning himself for his closing remarks. He looks directly at the main camera, establishing an intimate connection with the viewers. I stopped that recording because I understood that we were dealing with something that went beyond a television program. There were legal, ethical, and emotional implications that demanded extreme care. There were real lives at stake, not just in the past, but in the present and the future. He pauses, choosing his next words carefully, aware that this conclusion will inevitably become a defining moment for both the program and his own career. Families are complex systems, interconnected in ways we often don't fully understand. The secrets we keep, especially those born of fear, shame, or the desire to protect others, have the power to shape entire generations, even when they are never verbalized. The camera slowly pans, showing the faces of the three Wilsons, each reflecting different aspects of the same shared story. The same tragedy now transformed into a new possibility for genuine connection. What I learned from this extraordinary family is that the truth, no matter how painful, opens paths to healing that silence never would allow. Martha, Rebecca, and Jason now face an uncertain future, with potential legal challenges and certainly more emotional processing ahead. But they face it together, anchored in the truth, no longer separated by secrets. Dr. Phil points to the diary, now open on the central table, its yellowed pages exposed to the light. That diary contained not only the confession of a crime, it contained the testimony of a mother's fierce love for her daughter and of a daughter for her unborn child. It contained the story of women who made impossible choices in unthinkable circumstances and of how those choices reverberated through time, permeating the life of a man who is only now beginning to truly understand his origins. He takes a few more steps toward the audience, creating a sense of direct connection with the people present. I am not here to judge whether what Rebecca did was right or wrong. Legal justice will take its course, and each viewer will draw their own moral conclusion. I am here to acknowledge that human beings are capable of extreme acts when cornered, and that the subsequent secrecy can become as confining a prison as any physical penitentiary. Dr. Phil looks again at the Wilsons, who now form a visual unit, closed not only physically, but in spirit. What you have taught us is that it is never too late for the truth. 45 years is a long time to carry a secret of this magnitude, but even so, its revelation has brought a kind of freedom that none of you knew before. He turns to the camera one last time, his expression solemn yet hopeful. I interrupted that recording because I recognized that we were witnessing not just a televised moment, but a turning point in the real lives of three people. There were responsibilities, legal, ethical, human, that transcended the format of a program. And I believe we should always prioritize the human being above entertainment. As the studio lights gradually dim, the show's theme music quietly beginning in the background, Dr. Phil concludes with renewed conviction. Sometimes we need to stop everything, our assumptions, our judgments, our impulse to simplify complex stories, and simply acknowledge the tremendous courage it takes to finally say, this is the truth, this is my story, this is who I am, because in the end, that courage, that brutal honesty with oneself and with others, is the only path to authentic liberation. The camera slowly pulls back, showing the four on stage as the closing music builds in intensity. Martha, Rebecca, and Jason are now visibly united, three generations connected by blood, shaped by the same secret, finally set free by the transformative power of truth. The lights dim until only the outlines of silhouettes are visible, symbolically merging into a single familiar entity as the credits begin to roll.